When two homeless twin boys approached Keanu Reeves on the streets, their desperate plea led to a confession so shocking it changed everything. What he did next will leave you speechless. This is a story of resilience, heartbreak, and unimaginable kindness. Before we dive into this heartwarming and emotional story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more incredible stories that inspire, uplift, and stay with you long after they're told. The early morning sun peeked through the curtains of a modest cafe tucked away in the quieter part of Los Angeles. Keanu Reeves sat at a corner table, nursing a simple cup of black coffee. The faint hum of a nearby espresso machine mixed with the soft chatter of other patrons. For once, he had a day free from the relentless demands of his life. No interviews, no cameras, no scripts. Keanu's fingers traced the rim of his mug absent-mindedly. Though he appeared calm, his mind swirled with thoughts. He had always been drawn to quiet acts of kindness, finding solace in helping others without the fanfare that often followed a Hollywood name. Today, however, felt like any other morning, until a subtle movement outside the cafe window caught his eye. Two boys, no older than 8, lingered on the sidewalk. They were identical, with messy dark hair and faces smudged with dirt. Their thin jackets were threadbare, barely enough to fend off the morning chill. One of them clutched a battered backpack, its contents hidden but clearly precious to them. They glanced around nervously, their eyes darting between passers-by as if debating whether to approach anyone. Keanu felt a tug at his heart. There was something about the way they stood, close to each other, like they were protecting one another from the world. Without a second thought, he stood, leaving a few bills on the table, and walked out the door. The twins noticed him immediately. Their identical expressions flickered with uncertainty, but they didn't run. Instead, the younger one nudged his brother forward. Keanu approached with measured steps, his warm smile aiming to put them at ease. "Hey there," he said gently, crouching to their level. "You two okay?" The boys exchanged a glance. Finally, the older one spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mister, we need your help." The pair sat close together. "Let's get started." Keanu nodded. "Of course," he said, his voice as gentle as the morning breeze. "What's going on?" The younger boy hesitated but finally looked up, his tear-filled eyes locking with Keanu's. But we don't have any money, and we're really hungry." Keanu's chest tightened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded bill. "Here," he said, holding it out to them. "Get yourselves something to eat." The older boy stepped forward cautiously, his thin fingers snatching the bill like it was a lifeline. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice cracking with gratitude. The way they clung to each other, as if the world might rip them apart at any moment, made Keanu's heart ache. But something wasn't right. Keanu's eyes drifted to the backpack the younger twin held. A faint, unpleasant smell wafted from it, sharp and distinct, like something decaying. He opened his mouth to ask about it, but before he could, a harsh voice cut through the moment. "Boys, I told you not to talk to anyone." Keanu turned sharply toward the source of the voice. A man stood a few feet away, his face shadowed under the brim of a dirty baseball cap. His hunched posture and ragged clothing hinted at a hard life, but his glare was piercing and filled with authority. The boys flinched at the sound of his voice, and without a word, they turned and darted back toward him. "Wait!" Keanu called, but the boys were already slipping into an alleyway behind the man. Keanu took a step to follow, but the man shot him a warning glance. "This isn't your business," he growled, before vanishing with the twins into the shadows. Keanu stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. The interaction had felt off, more than off. He glanced back toward the cafe he'd left and noticed a small convenience store next door. Quickly he stepped inside and bought a couple of bottles of water and some sandwiches. The cashier gave him a curious look, but he ignored it, stuffing the items into a paper bag and heading back to the alley. He leaned casually against the wall near the entrance, his sunglasses shielding his face as he watched for any sign of the twins. Time ticked by slowly, the sun climbing higher in the sky, but Keanu didn't move. He couldn't. The image of the boys' fearful expressions haunted him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he saw movement. The twins emerged from the alley, their heads low and their steps hurried. Keanu straightened and approached them, keeping his voice calm and low. "Hey, it's okay," he said. "I just want to help." The boys stopped abruptly, their eyes wide with panic. Keanu crouched down again, holding out the bag of food and water. "Take this," he said. "You don't have to tell me anything, but I can't just leave you like this." The older boy hesitated, but the younger one took the bag quickly, clutching it to his chest. "Thank you," he mumbled, barely above a whisper. Keanu watched them eat, his heart heavy. "What's your name?" he asked gently. The older twin looked up, wiping crumbs from his lips. "I'm Aaron," he said, then gestured to his brother. "This is Eli." Keanu nodded. "Aaron, Eli?" "It's nice to meet you both. I want to help, but I need to know what's going on. Can you tell me where your parents are?" Aaron's face darkened and he exchanged a glance with Eli, who lowered his head, staring at the ground. "It's just us," Aaron finally said, his voice steady but strained. "Our mom, she's sick. She can't take care of us right now." Keanu felt a pang of sadness but kept his expression calm. "Where is she?" he asked. "Is she close by?" Eli looked up, his eyes glistening with tears. "She's in the tent," he said softly. "She doesn't like us bringing people." Keanu nodded, understanding their hesitation. "I won't do anything you're not comfortable with," he assured them, "but I'd like to help if I can. Maybe I can talk to her?" Aaron hesitated, clearly torn. Finally he nodded. "Okay, but you have to be careful. There's someone who watches the area." Keanu's brow furrowed. "Watches?" Aaron's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Uncle Carl. He takes care of the tents, but he doesn't like strangers. He makes everyone pay to stay safe." Keanu's jaw tightened at the implication. These boys and their mother were not only struggling with poverty, but also with a system of control that exploited their vulnerability. He kept his voice calm and steady. "I understand. We'll be careful." Aaron and Eli led Keanu down a narrow alley, their small frames weaving effortlessly through the maze of discarded belongings and makeshift shelters. Keanu followed closely, his senses heightened. Every step took him further into a world he could hardly imagine. A world where children grew up navigating threats no one their age should face. As they approached a larger, tarp-covered tent, Aaron pressed a finger to his lips, signaling Keanu to stay quiet. A deep, guttural snore came from a nearby tent, and Aaron pointed. "That's Uncle Carl," he whispered. "He's asleep now, but if he wakes up, Keanu nodded, his heart pounding. He carefully stepped around loose cans and crumpled paper, following the boys until they reached their mother's tent. Aaron ducked inside first, followed by Eli, leaving Keanu to wait just outside. The minutes stretched on, each one heavy with anticipation. Keanu's mind raced with questions. What would he find inside? What could he possibly do to help these boys and their mother? Finally, Aaron peeked out from behind the flap and beckoned him inside. Keanu took a deep breath and stepped into the dimly lit space. The air was thick with the smell of damp fabric and faint traces of antiseptic. In the center of the tent sat a woman on a thin pallet of blankets. Her face was pale, and her hollow cheek spoke of long-term illness, but her eyes were sharp and assessing. She blinked in surprise as Keanu entered, recognition flickering across her face. "Keanu Reeves," she said, her voice hoarse but tinged with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" Keanu crouched to her level, his expression soft and sincere. "I met your boys," he said simply. "They told me you weren't feeling well. I wanted to see if there's anything I can do to help." Marian's guarded expression didn't waver, her lips pressed into a thin line and her sharp tone cut through the tense air. "Is this some kind of PR stunt? Cameras hiding around the corner? We're not interested in being your feel-good charity headline." Before Keanu could respond, Aaron stepped forward, his voice high-pitched with urgency. "Mom, he's not like that. He gave us food and water. He's nice." "Yeah, he wants to help," Eli added, clutching Keanu's earlier gift, a now empty water bottle, as though it were a priceless treasure. Keanu nodded, his expression sincere. There are no cameras. This is between us. I just want to help you. No strings attached. Marianne studied him for a long, tense moment, her narrowed eyes scanning his face for any sign of deceit. Finally, her shoulders relaxed just slightly, a crack in her defensive shell. Why? She asked simply. Why would you care about people like us? Keanu took a deep breath. Because no one, especially not kids, should live like this. I have the means to help, and I'd like to. That's all there is to it. Marianne's eyes flickered toward her boys, the love and worry she felt for them written across her face. Slowly, she exhaled. It wasn't always like this, she said, her voice quieter now, tinged with pain. We had a home once, a normal life. Keanu leaned in, giving her the space to share on her terms. My husband, she began, her words faltering before she pushed forward. He was supportive at first, especially when we found out about Eli's condition. But it got to be too much for him. A sick child, the bills, the appointments. After the first year, he started spending more time away. One night he came home, packed his things, and told us we had to leave. Just like that. Aaron and Ellie shuffled closer to their mother as she spoke, their small hands gripping her sleeves for reassurance. We ended up here, Marianne continued, gesturing vaguely to the streets beyond. 5 years of scraping by. My condition got worse without proper care, and now, Eli. Her voice cracked as she looked at her youngest son, her hand brushing his hair. They say his case might still be reversible. If we could afford the surgery. Keanu's heart ached, but his voice was firm. Then that's what we'll do, he said resolutely. I'll cover the cost of treatment. For both of you. And I'll make sure you're somewhere safe. You won't have to come back here. Marian blinked, her eyes filling with tears, though her expression remained skeptical. If you help us, she said, her voice steady, you have to understand, this life, it's dangerous. People here get desperate. If they think we have money, or that someone's looking out for us, it could make us targets. Keanu nodded, his jaw set. I understand. We'll be careful. I'll make sure this is handled discreetly. The conversation was interrupted by Aaron's nervous glance toward the tense entrance. Uncle Carl, he whispered, his voice barely audible. He's still asleep now, but if he wakes up, Keanu's expression hardened. Then we don't wait. Let's go now. Marianne hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Okay, she said, her voice firm. Let's do it. With quiet efficiency, the family gathered their few possessions, a threadbare bag of clothing, a plastic container holding scraps of food, and a battered photo album. As Marianne rose, Keanu noticed the strain in her movements, the wince she tried to suppress. Let me carry something, he offered. Marianne shook her head. We don't have much. Just help us get out. Aaron peeked outside, his small face tense. Uncle Carl's still snoring, he whispered. Keanu nodded, and they began their cautious journey through the encampment. The air in the alley was stifling, thick with the stench of garbage and decay. Keanu followed closely behind the twins, his senses on high alert. Every rustle of fabric, every faint creak of the uneven ground beneath their feet seemed amplified in the silence. They passed Uncle Carl's tent, a hulking mass of patched tarps and scavenged metal poles. From inside came the sound of heavy rhythmic breathing. Keanu's pulse quickened as they slipped by, holding their breath until the snoring faded into the distance. Finally, the alley opened onto the street. The bright sunlight was almost blinding after the dimness of the encampment. Without hesitating, the group headed straight for the hospital's side entrance. Inside, the cool, sterile environment of the hospital was a stark contrast to the squalor they had just left. Keanu approached the front desk, speaking quietly but firmly to the nurse on duty. I need to speak with Dr. Patel urgently, he said, naming a trusted contact he had worked with before. Within minutes they were ushered into a consultation room. The boys clung to each other as they waited, their wide eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. Marianne sat stiffly on the examination table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. When Dr. Patel entered, she took one look at the family and then at Keanu. What's going on? She asked, her professional demeanor blending with curiosity. Keanu quickly explained the situation. Dr. Patel's expression shifted to one of quiet determination as she turned to Eli. "Let's start with you," she said gently. "We'll figure this out together." "No." As tests began, Keanu stood to the side, watching as hope began to take root in the faces of the twin boys and their mother. For the first time in years, they weren't alone. And they knew it. Keanu sat across from Marianne, his chair pulled close to hers as the weight of their conversation hung in the sterile air of the consultation room. Marianne's hands rested on her lap, trembling slightly, a mixture of exhaustion and cautious hope etched into her face. "How are you holding up?" Keanu asked gently, leaning forward with an earnest expression. Marianne exhaled deeply, shaking her head. "It's a lot," she admitted, her voice wavering. "I'm grateful, more than you can imagine. But I keep wondering, what happens after all this? Even if we get the medical care, where do we go? We can't go back to the streets, not with Eli recovering." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that," he said, his tone calm yet resolute. "I have connections with organizations that specialize in helping families like yours. We can work on finding you stable housing and job training if you're ready. This isn't just about getting you through the next few weeks. It's about building a future." Marianne's eyes widened, disbelief flickering across her face. "You'd do all that for us?" "Absolutely," Keanu said with quiet determination. "This is about more than just getting through today. You deserve a real chance at stability." 1.2. As Keanu outlined potential next steps, Marianne listened intently, her skepticism gradually replaced by tentative hope. He spoke of transitional housing, support networks, and job opportunities tailored to her strengths. For the first time in years, she began to see a path forward. When Dr. Patel and a few nurses returned with Aaron and Eli, the boys sporting small bandages on their arms from the blood draw, the room seemed lighter. The twins' nervous energy was still palpable, but it was tempered by the excitement of what lay ahead. On the screen, Aunt Patra looked. "All right, Marianne," Dr. Patel said warmly. "It's your turn for the blood work. We'll get everything ready for the next round of tests." Marianne rose from her chair, her movement slow but determined. "I'll be back soon," she said, her voice steady as she followed Dr. Patel out of the room. Keanu turned his attention to the twins, who had settled onto the examination table. Their small faces were lit with a mixture of curiosity and cautious optimism. "You two have been incredibly brave," Keanu said with a reassuring smile. "How are you feeling about all this?" Aaron was the first to speak, his voice quiet but firm. "It's scary," he admitted, "but good scary, like maybe things might actually get better." Eli nodded, his hand clasping his brother's tightly. "I'm nervous about the tests," he whispered, "but if it means I can get better like Aaron, it's worth it." Keanu felt a lump rise in his throat at their resilience. "You're both so strong," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "And you're not alone anymore. We're all here to help you, every step of the way." As the family continued with their evaluations, Keanu excused himself to the hallway. He scrolled through his phone briefly, bypassing a barrage of missed calls and texts from his team. The messages were urgent. His meeting with the major director was slipping through the cracks. But in this moment, it didn't matter. He had made his choice. Instead, Keanu dialed a trusted contact in social services, quickly explaining the family's situation. His assistant, though initially surprised by the shift in priorities, snapped into action. Within minutes, arrangements were being made for temporary housing at a facility equipped to support Eli's recovery. When Keanu returned to the consultation room, Aaron and Eli's eyes widened as he explained the plan. The thought of sleeping in real beds, eating regular meals, and staying together as a family brought tears to their eyes. They rushed to hug Keanu, their gratitude pouring out in ways words couldn't capture. Marianne entered the room shortly after, looking weary but relieved. When Keanu shared the news about the housing arrangements, her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes glistening. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "You've given us hope when we thought there was none." Keanu smiled, shaking his head. "You don't need to thank me. Seeing you all together with a real chance at a future, that's all the thanks I need." The consultation room buzzed with cautious optimism as Dr. Patel re-entered, carrying the preliminary test results. She spoke of Eli's promising prognosis and Marianne's ongoing treatment needs, carefully outlining the steps ahead. Keanu listened intently, his focus unwavering. When Dr. Patel left to prepare for the next phase of Eli's treatment, Keanu found himself reflecting on the day's events. What had begun as a routine moment of generosity had turned into something far more profound, a chance to transform lives. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, but he ignored it, choosing instead to remain fully present. For the first time in years, he felt a clarity of purpose that no role or accolade could replicate. As the sun set outside the hospital, Keanu stood alongside Marianne and her boys, knowing this was just the beginning. Challenges lay ahead, but so did possibilities, and he was committed to walking this journey with them every step of the way.